For the last 40 years, the Brown family has risked.
Alaskan Bush People shocking. The Brown family left everything behind to live wild and free in the Alaskan wilderness. But in 2026, nothing about them looks the same anymore. What happened to the family that once called the bush their home? And why are some of them never going back? Join us as we uncover the shocking transformation of the Alaskan Bush People, the reality show that made the Brown family famous. Living in the middle of nowhere, with no electricity, no running water, and no grocery store down the street, just trees, snow, mountains, and wild animals all around you, that was the life of the Brown family, and millions of people couldn't stop watching. Alaskan Bush People first aired on Discovery Channel in 2014, following Billy Brown, his wife Ami, and their 7 children as they lived deep in the Alaskan wilderness, building their own shelters, hunting their own food, and surviving in places where most people wouldn't last a week. The show made the family look like something from a different world, and in many ways, they were. Billy Brown was the heart of it all, the father, the leader, the storyteller.
Brown's old untold story. Here we are.
It's not about to be untold. It's gonna be a long one. Hope you guys brought your sleeping bags.
Full voice and an even bigger personality, who called his family the Wolf Pack, a name that said everything about who they were: wild, loyal, and unbreakable no matter what life threw at them. Each of the 7 kids had their own personality that fans fell in love with, from Matt, the oldest, always trying to prove himself, to Bam Bam, the quiet one who kept everything running, to Bear, the wild and crazy one who jumped off cliffs just for fun, to Gabe, the gentle giant, to Noah, the creative inventor, and then the 2 sisters, Snowbird, who seemed born for the wilderness, and Rain, the youngest, growing up on camera for the whole world to see. Together they built boats, chopped wood, and raised walls with their bare hands, and every episode felt like a brand new adventure. At its peak, Alaskan Bush People pulled in millions of viewers every single week, because people loved the idea of a family that didn't need the modern world, and in a time when everyone was glued to their phones and stressed about bills, the Brown family felt like freedom itself. Fan pages exploded online. People debated which Brown kid was their favorite. Viewers sent letters and gifts, and the family became genuine celebrities, which was strange, of course, for people who were supposed to be living completely off the grid. But here's the thing about the Brown family that not everyone knew back then. Because behind the cameras, life wasn't always what it looked like on screen, with questions about how real the show actually was, rumors brewing just out of sight, and money problems and legal trouble quietly building in the background. The family that millions of people thought they knew was about to go through something none of them could have predicted, and the changes came slowly at first, then all at once, like a storm nobody saw coming. Because the biggest story of the Brown family was never the one playing out on television, and the real story was just beginning, starting with a loss so devastating it would shake the Wolf Pack to its very core. And that loss had a name, a face, and a date that Brown family fans will never forget. The tragedy that changed the Brown family forever. February 7th, 2021 started like any other day on the Brown family's property in Washington state, with the show still going, the cameras still rolling, and the Wolf Pack still together. But by the end of that day, everything had changed forever. Billy Brown, the man who built the family, gave them the name Wolf Pack and led them through decades of wilderness survival, suffered a seizure and collapsed, and despite being rushed to the hospital, the doctors couldn't save him, leaving behind a family and a fan base that had no idea this was coming. He was 68 years old.
Good. It means that there is an emergency. Something bad is going on.
The Browns are working to re-establish a base camp on their mountain ranch.
Millions of viewers, Billy wasn't just a TV character. He felt real, like someone's tough, wise, larger-than-life grandfather. A man with a way of talking about family and freedom that made people believe in something bigger than themselves. And now he was simply gone. Ami Brown, his wife of over 40 years, had already been through so much with him, building a life together that most people couldn't imagine. And now she was left to carry on without the man who had been by her side through everything. The Brown children were completely devastated, with Bear posting on social media that his heart was broken. Other family members going quiet for days, the kind of quiet that only comes when grief is too heavy and too big to put into words. Discovery Channel paused production, and for a moment, nobody knew if the show would ever continue at all. What made Billy's death even more painful was the timing, because the family had already been through years of hard times by 2021. Ami's cancer battle had terrified everyone. Legal troubles had followed the family in the headlines, and then COVID-19 had locked down the entire world and left everyone feeling uncertain and afraid. Through every single one of those storms, Billy had been the one who held it all together, the one who made the plans, gave the speeches, and looked his kids in the eyes to remind them that the wolf pack never quits. Without him, that role belonged to no one, and the family had to figure out, slowly and painfully, how to move forward without their anchor. The show eventually continued, with the family saying it was what Billy would have wanted, that the wolf pack had to keep going. But anyone watching could see the difference, a quietness where his voice used to be, a gap in every scene that nothing could quite fill. Grief does strange things to families, sometimes pulling people closer, sometimes pushing them gently apart. And for the Brown family, it did a little bit of both. As each member began finding their own way to survive the loss, but while the family was still learning how to live without their father, one member was quietly facing a battle of her own, a terrifying diagnosis that doctors warned her she might not survive. Amy Brown's fight against impossible odds. While the Brown family was still grieving Billy, Amy Brown was already fighting a battle that had started years earlier, one that began with a diagnosis so serious it stopped the entire family in their tracks and forced them to leave the Alaskan wilderness behind completely. The doctors found stage 3 lung cancer, and the news landed like a weight nobody was prepared to carry, with Ami's chances of survival described as dangerously small, her body needing treatment that no amount of wilderness survival skills could provide. The family packed up and moved to California so Ami could access the medical care she desperately needed, leaving behind the forests and mountains that had defined their lives for so long, trading the wild for hospital waiting rooms and treatment schedules and the slow, exhausting grind of fighting a disease that takes everything from a person before it gives anything back. It was a side of the Brown family that viewers hadn't seen before, vulnerable, scared, and completely dependent on the modern world they had always lived without. And for fans who had watched Ami chop wood and survive Alaskan winters, seeing her weakened by illness was deeply unsettling. But Ami Brown was not someone who gave up easily. She pushed through round after round of treatment, leaning on her family, holding onto her faith, and slowly, against the odds that had been stacked against her, she began to recover, with doctors eventually delivering the news the whole family had been praying for: remission. The relief was overwhelming, and for a brief moment, it felt like the worst was behind them, like the wolf pack had survived yet another impossible storm and come out the other side still standing. But cancer has a way of leaving a long shadow, and years later, another health scare reminded everyone just how fragile things still were, pulling the family back into that familiar place of fear and uncertainty, where every update from the doctors carried the weight of the world. Ami's story became one of the most emotional threads running through the entire series.
My cancer therapy when we were there in LA and stuff, I told you about being in a wheelchair and I was just down a lot because I don't really interact with people a lot, believe it or not.
Because it wasn't just about illness, it was about a mother holding her family together even while her own body was working against her, and a family refusing to fall apart even when everything around them was threatening to do exactly that. She survived something that takes so many people, and she did it while the cameras were rolling and the whole world was watching. The son who disappeared from the show. Of all the Brown children, Matt was the one who seemed most like his father, loud, adventurous, and always chasing something just beyond the horizon, which made it all the more noticeable when he suddenly stopped appearing on the show and the family stopped talking about him publicly. Matt Brown, the eldest of the 7 children, had been there from the very beginning, one of the most recognizable faces of Alaskan Bush People. And then, almost without warning, he was simply gone, leaving fans asking questions that took a long time to get real answers to. The truth, when it finally came out, was that Matt had been struggling with addiction for years, a battle that had been playing out largely away from the cameras, pulling him further and further from the family and the life they had built together on television. He went to rehab, working to get clean and rebuild himself, and while his family supported him through it,
quite a few of them I've put in here on my own as well. There are topics that I found very important, either in therapy or in rehab or in recovery.
the distance between Matt and the rest of the wolf pack grew wider with each passing season, his absence becoming one of those things the show quietly worked around rather than addressed head-on. Then came the accident that shocked everyone who had been following his story, an explosion that occurred while Matt was away from the family, an incident serious enough that many feared he wouldn't survive it, and which left him physically and emotionally changed in ways that took a long time to fully understand. He recovered, but the Matt who came out the other side was clearly someone who had been through things most people couldn't imagine, carrying the weight of addiction, injury, and years of public scrutiny all at once, trying to rebuild a life piece by piece outside the spotlight that had defined his childhood and early adulthood. After everything, Matt began creating a quieter life for himself, away from the show, away from the cameras, and largely away from the public eye, occasionally surfacing on social media to share updates with fans who had never stopped caring about him. Whether he would ever return to the Brown family's on-screen story remained one of the most talked-about questions in the fan community, with many holding on to hope that the eldest Wolfpack member might one day find his way back. But while Matt was rebuilding his life in private, another Brown brother had also quietly stepped away from the cameras, and the reason why surprised almost everyone who thought they knew the family. Bam Bam's secret life away from the cameras. Of all the Brown children, Joshua, known to everyone as Bam Bam, was always one of the quietest, the one who worked hard without needing the attention, the one who held things together in the background while his louder siblings took up most of the space on screen, which perhaps explains why his departure from the show felt so different from the others. Bam Bam didn't leave because of a crisis or a scandal. He left because he had found something real, something that made the world of reality television feel small by comparison, and he simply chose to walk toward it instead. That something was Allison Kagan, a producer who had worked on Alaskan Bush People and had spent considerable time with the family during filming, getting to know them in the way that only someone behind the scenes truly can, seeing both the version that made it onto television and the version that didn't. Their relationship developed quietly and away from the public eye, which was fitting for someone like Bam Bam, who had never been the type to broadcast his personal life or chase attention for its own sake. And when fans eventually found out about the two of them, the reaction was a mixture of surprise and genuine happiness. Together, Bam Bam and Allison built a life that still carried some of the adventure the Brown family had always been known for, working on boats, renovating vessels, and chasing experiences that kept them moving and connected to the kind of hands-on living Bam Bam had grown up with in the wilderness. It wasn't the Wolfpack version of adventure, but it was his own version, shaped by his own choices, and there was something quietly powerful about watching a man who had spent his entire childhood living someone else's idea of freedom finally go off and build his own. He stayed largely out of the public eye, rarely making headlines, seldom stirring up controversy, just living the kind of steady, the grounded life that stood in sharp contrast to some of the more turbulent stories unfolding among his siblings at the same time. Fans who had always appreciated Bam Bam's calm presence on the show respected his choice, even if they missed seeing him, understanding that for some people, the best life is the one lived farthest from the camera. But not every Brown brother found that kind of quiet, because one of them was generating more headlines, more controversy, and more drama than almost anyone else in the family, and his story was far from over. Bear Brown's most controversial moments. If Bam Bam was the quietest of the Brown brothers, then Bear was without question the loudest, the most unpredictable, and the one most likely to show up in a headline for reasons that had nothing to do with wilderness survival, making him both one of the most beloved and most controversial figures the show ever produced. Bear Brown had always been the wild one, the brother who threw himself off rocks into freezing water, who screamed at the sky just because he felt like it, who treated every single day like it was the most extreme thing that had ever happened to him, and fans had loved him for exactly that energy for years. But as Bear got older, the wildness that had seemed so entertaining on screen began spilling into his personal life in ways that were harder to watch and much harder to ignore. He became a father, welcoming a son named River with his then-girlfriend, Raven Adams. And for a moment, it seemed like fatherhood might be the thing that finally grounded him, giving him something to channel all that restless energy into, something worth slowing down for. The relationship with Raven, however, did not last, and what followed was a legal situation that played out uncomfortably in public, with allegations and disputes that landed Bear in serious trouble and generated the kind of attention no one in the family wanted, drawing criticism from fans who had spent years rooting for him. He fought through the legal drama, but the damage to his public image was real, and the conversations around Bear shifted from celebrating his wild spirit to questioning his judgment. With social media becoming both his main connection to fans and the place where many of his most controversial moments unfolded in real time, Bear had always been active online, sharing updates, posting videos, and engaging with followers in a way his siblings rarely did. But that visibility came with a cost, because every misstep was public, every controversy was immediate, and the comment sections beneath his posts reflected just how divided opinion had become about who Bear Brown really was. Through all of it, he kept going, kept posting, kept showing up, and eventually began teasing a new online series that suggested he wasn't done performing for an audience, just done doing it through the traditional channels that had made his family famous in the first place. Whether that new chapter would restore his reputation or add another complicated layer to an already complicated story remained something only time could answer. But while Bear was living his life at full volume, one of his brothers had quietly become the most stable and settled member of the entire wolf pack, building exactly the kind of life their father had always dreamed of for his children. Gabe Brown's quiet transformation. There is something almost surprising about Gabriel Brown's story, not because it is filled with drama or scandal or shocking headlines, but because of the opposite. Because in a family that had become known for chaos and crisis and constant upheaval, Gabe quietly became the one who simply got on with it, and watching that happen from a distance felt like its own kind of remarkable thing. Gabe had always been one of the gentler presences on Alaskan Bush People, big and broad-shouldered but soft-spoken in a way that made him easy to overlook, next to louder siblings like Bear, always doing the work without needing anyone to applaud him for it, always more interested in being useful than being noticed. That quality followed him off-screen too, and while the rest of the family was navigating public scandals, health crises, and personal unraveling, Gabe found Raquel, Rose Pantilla, fell in love, and built something steady and real with her. The kind of relationship that doesn't generate many headlines precisely because it is functioning the way a relationship should. The two married and started a family together, with children arriving and a domestic life taking shape that looked genuinely happy in the way reality television almost never manages to capture honestly, because it wasn't performed for a camera, it was just life, ordinary and warm and quietly full. Gabe also faced his own health struggles during the family's most difficult years, dealing with physical challenges that tested him at a time when the family as a whole was already carrying more than its fair share of pain, and navigating those struggles without turning them into a public spectacle said a great deal about who he had become. He kept a relatively low profile online compared to Bear, didn't stir up controversy, didn't chase attention, and seemed genuinely more interested in the world immediately around him than in the wider audience that had watched him grow up on screen. Fans who had followed the show from the beginning often pointed to Gabe as the quiet success story of the Brown family, the one who had taken everything the wilderness had taught him about patience and hard work and applied it to building a life that actually lasted. In a family narrative full of heartbreak and instability, Gabe's chapter read like a breath of fresh air, proof that the wolf pack could produce something gentle and enduring alongside everything else. But not every Brown brother found that kind of peace in his relationship, because the next chapter in the family story brought an announcement that caught even the most devoted fans completely off guard. Noah Brown's marriage that took an unexpected turn. Noah Brown had always been the different one, the inventor, the tinkerer, the brother who would rather spend an afternoon building something strange and mechanical than doing almost anything else. And that creative restlessness made him one of the most quietly fascinating members of the Brown family, to follow both on screen and off. Where Bear ran toward chaos and Gabe settled into calm, Noah occupied his own unusual space, someone who seemed perfectly comfortable operating outside the boundaries of what anyone expected, building gadgets in the wilderness, fashioning tools out of whatever he could find, and approaching the world with a kind of eccentric confidence that was entirely his own. His relationship with Rain Alicia seemed to fit that same spirit, the two of them finding each other and building a life that looked unconventional from the outside, but appeared to work precisely because neither of them needed it to look like anything in particular, welcoming children together and creating a family unit that carried the warmth of genuine connection. For a long time, Noah and Rain represented one of the more hopeful storylines in the Brown family saga, a young couple building something new while the older generation of the family was dealing with illness and grief, and the slow unraveling of the show that had made them all famous. Fans followed their journey with real affection, watching their children grow and their little family expand, finding in Noah's story something that felt quieter and more human than some of the louder drama unfolding elsewhere in the wolf pack. Which is exactly what made the announcement in 2025 so unexpected. When news emerged that Noah and Rain had separated, a piece of information that landed quietly but was felt deeply by the community of fans who had invested in their story over the years and who had perhaps assumed that of all the Brown relationships, this one was built to last. The details surrounding the separation remained largely private, which was consistent with the way Noah had always handled his personal life, preferring to let actions speak and keeping the more painful things close, away from the noise of social media and public opinion. It was another reminder that the Brown family story never stayed still for long, that just when one chapter seemed to settle into something comfortable, the next one arrived with a twist nobody saw coming, and that the wolf pack, whatever shape it took now, was still very much a work in progress. And while Noah's story was taking its unexpected turn, two of the youngest members of the family were quietly stepping into adulthood in ways that showed just how much they had grown since the cameras first found them. Snowbird and Rain, growing up in the spotlight. Of all the Brown children, Snowbird and Rain carried perhaps the strangest burden of all, because they had grown up entirely on camera, their childhoods unfolding in front of millions of strangers who felt they knew them, which meant that every awkward year, every difficult moment, and every private struggle had an audience that never quite went away. Snowbird Brown, with her long blonde hair and fierce connection to the natural world, had always seemed like the most authentically wild of the Brown children, the one who genuinely belonged in the wilderness in a way that went beyond what any television show could manufacture, and fans had loved her for exactly that quality from the very beginning. But behind that image, Snowbird was dealing with something serious, a health scare involving tumors that reminded everyone watching that the people on their screens were real, fragile, and fighting battles that had nothing to do with building cabins or catching fish, and her quiet courage in facing that situation earned her a deeper kind of respect from the people who had followed her story for years. She channeled much of her energy into creative work and stayed connected with fans through social media in a way that felt genuine rather than performative, sharing pieces of her inner world with a warmth that the cameras had never quite managed to capture fully. Rain Brown's journey was different but equally striking, because the little girl who had appeared on screen as the baby of the family had grown into a young woman with her own voice, her own perspective, and her own path forward that had very little to do with the version of herself the show had presented to the world. Her marriage to Josiah Lorton marked a significant moment in that journey, a step into adulthood that felt personal and real, a reminder that Rain was no longer just the youngest Brown kid but someone building her own life on her own terms, separate from the Wolfpack identity that had followed her since childhood. Together, Snowbird and Rain represented something important in the broader Brown family story, proof that growing up in the spotlight doesn't have to define a person, and that even children raised on reality television can find their way to something honest and their own. But while the younger sisters were stepping forward, the show itself was quietly disappearing, and the reasons behind that were far more complicated than anyone had been told. The real reason the show disappeared. For 11 seasons, Alaskan Bush People had been a fixture on Discovery Channel, pulling in viewers week after week with the promise of a family living completely outside the boundaries of modern life. And then, without the kind of dramatic farewell that such a long-running show might have deserved, it simply faded away, leaving fans with questions that took years to fully piece together. The first visible shift came when the family left Alaska entirely, relocating to a property in Washington state they called North Star Ranch, a move that quietly undermined the entire premise of the show, because a family living on a ranch in Washington was a very different story from a family surviving in the remote Alaskan wilderness, and the audience felt that difference even if nobody said it directly. Then came the lawsuit, a legal dispute that reportedly caused serious damage behind the scenes, creating tensions between the family and the production that never fully resolved, and casting a long shadow over the future of the series at a time when it was already struggling to find its footing without Billy Brown at its center. The lawsuit wasn't the only problem, because questions about the authenticity of the show had been circulating for years, with reports suggesting that the family's off-grid lifestyle had been significantly shaped by producers, that certain elements of their wilderness existence had been constructed or exaggerated for dramatic effect, and that the reality behind the reality television was considerably more complicated than what appeared on screen. Those revelations didn't destroy the show's legacy entirely, because millions of people had genuinely connected with the Brown family and genuinely cared about what happened to them, but it did change the way many fans looked back on what they had watched, adding a layer of uncertainty to memories they had previously taken at face value. The Brown children moved forward in different directions, some pursuing new careers, some building quiet lives away from cameras, and some keeping the door open to the possibility of returning to television in some form, unwilling to let the story end on someone else's terms. And the question fans kept asking, whether the Wolfpack might one day come back together for one more chapter, remained unanswered, hanging in the air like the Alaskan wilderness itself, vast, unresolved, and full of possibility. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.